It was Isla's birthday. I had been in the kitchen for hours, sweating over her favorite lemon rosemary chicken, the one I used to make for her on special days since she was a little girl. The table was already set with the linen cloth I kept aside for family dinners, the one with tiny embroidered flowers Isla once spilled grape juice on when she was 6. I had scrubbed that stain out so many times it eventually became just a memory. Like so many other things. The house was filled with the aroma of rosemary and garlic, and soft music played in the background. Laughter came from the dining room. Isla, her husband Brad, and their son Caleb were already seated, sipping wine. I had asked them to wait a few more minutes while I finished up the last tray. I smiled to myself, adjusted my blouse in the hallway mirror, and picked up the final dish. That's when I heard it. Brad asked something. I couldn't quite hear what, but Isla answered loud and clear. Why does Mom always make everything about her? She didn't know I was right there, close enough to hear, close enough to feel it land like a slap across the face. My feet froze in place. I stood there, balancing the tray in my hands, staring blankly at the hallway rug. The same one she and I picked out at a clearance sale 10 years ago, when we both thought Sunday dinners were going to be our tradition forever. My throat tightened. I waited. I hoped maybe she'd take it back, laugh it off, but instead Brad chuckled. Caleb giggled. And then Isla said, more softly this time, she just needs everyone to notice her all the time. They moved on. The conversation shifted to vacation plans, as if I hadn't just been gutted on the other side of the wall. I swallowed the lump in my throat and walked into the dining room like nothing had happened. I smiled politely, set the tray down, and asked if anyone needed more water. Not one of them looked me in the eye, not even Isla. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly. Like the sound of fabric tearing deep in your coat on a windy day. You don't notice it right away, but later, the cold starts to get in. That's what it felt like. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even grief. Not yet. It was something slower, a kind of hollowing. For years, I had held this family together, showed up, cooked, cleaned, babysat, listened, celebrated, cared. I made their lives run quietly so they never had to notice the gears behind the comfort. And now I was just too much, a burden, a spectacle. I excused myself after dinner, saying I had a headache. Isla barely looked up from her phone. Brad mumbled something that might have been "feel better." Caleb asked if I brought dessert. I walked home that night with my jacket pulled tight around me and no tears in my eyes. Not yet. Because the worst part wasn't the comment. It wasn't the laughter. It was realizing I wasn't shocked. Somewhere deep down, I had known. But hearing it out loud, hearing my own daughter reduce me to a punchline, was the beginning of something I didn't see coming, and it all started with one sentence I'll never forget. Why does Mom always make everything about her? Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before everything shifted, I thought I had a good life. Not perfect, not easy, but full. I was never one of those women who needed much. I found comfort in routines, in little things. Folding laundry still warm from the dryer, watching old movies with a cup of chamomile tea, planting herbs in my kitchen window and pretending the basil actually liked the way I talked to it. And most of all, I loved being a mother. When Isla was born, I was just 27 and terrified. Her father, Gary, was around long enough to say he wasn't ready to be a parent, and then vanished into a string of new relationships. But I didn't care. Not really. Isla's tiny hand curling around my finger in that hospital room made everything feel possible. It made me feel possible. I worked hard, double shifts at the diner, weekend sewing jobs, whatever I could find. We didn't have a lot, but Isla never missed a field trip, a school photo, or a birthday party. I remember once I walked 2 miles through the rain because the car broke down and she had a school recital. I arrived soaked, but I saw her little face light up from the stage, and it felt like sunshine broke through my bones. She was always my soft spot, my reason. We were close, or at least I thought we were. I helped her get through college, took out a small second mortgage for tuition. She never asked. I just did it. That's what moms do. We give quietly, behind the curtain. When she married Brad, I was there every step of the way. I stayed up late helping with the seating chart, paid for her wedding dress, and made 300 wedding favors by hand while watching reruns of Murder, she wrote. She said, "You're the only person I trust to make it special, Mom." I cried that night. I believed her. Then came Caleb, my grandson, my heart. From the moment I held him, I felt like I had been given another chance to love that deeply again. I babysat for free, of course. Took care of him when they had work, errands, vacations. I changed his diapers, taught him how to tie his shoes, read him bedtime stories when they were too tired. He once called me his best grown-up. Must I still have that scribbled drawing on my fridge. We had Sunday dinners every week. I cooked from scratch, roast chicken, green beans with almonds, sweet potato casserole. Brad always brought wine. Isla brought her stories from work, and Caleb brought a new joke or toy he couldn't wait to show me. I lived for those nights. There was laughter, smiles, dishes clinking. It all felt like something I could count on, like breathing. And yes, maybe I talked too much sometimes. Maybe I told the same story twice, but that's just what moms do when the house is too quiet the rest of the week. I never noticed the shift, not at first. Looking back now, the signs were there. A glance exchanged between Isla and Brad. A comment about how I hover. A slow pulling away, like the tide retreating from the shore. But back then, I didn't feel it. Or maybe I didn't want to. I believed in the warmth we shared, the connection, the love. And I truly believed I had a place in their lives. A place I had earned, not by demanding it, but by loving them into it. It wasn't until much later that I realized something hard. I had made my entire world about them, and they had outgrown me without even saying goodbye. But at the time, I still thought we were fine. I still thought I was wanted. And that's what makes what happened next hurt in a way I'll never fully explain. The first real crack in the glass came one Thanksgiving. It was the first one Isla hosted at her home instead of mine. I told her I was proud of her. Really, I was. It felt like a milestone, watching my daughter step into the role of matriarch, taking on the tradition I had upheld for decades. She insisted I bring the green bean casserole. "No one makes it like you do," she said. That warmed me. I thought it meant she still needed me, still valued me. I even brought my special vintage baking dish, the white one with the faded blue flowers Isla used to call the pretty pan when she was 5. Her house was decorated beautifully. Martha Stewart would have been impressed. There were tiny pumpkins on each plate, name cards in perfect cursive, and gold cloth napkins folded into fans. Brad poured wine like he was hosting a cooking show, and Isla floated between guests like someone who had done this 100 times. I was genuinely proud of her. Dinner was nearly ready when I offered to say a few words before we ate. Just a short blessing, something I always did at family meals. It had become tradition, even a little joke. I'd get sentimental and someone would pretend to yawn and we'd all laugh. It was harmless, affectionate. I stood up and began to speak, my hands folded gently in front of me. I barely got 3 sentences in when Brad, sitting across the table, leaned toward Isla and muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "Careful, Marlene's going to monologue again." There was a ripple of laughter around the table. Isla laughed too, not a nervous chuckle, a real, unbothered laugh. My heart didn't break in that moment. It dented, quietly, like a spoon bending under pressure. I paused, smiled, tried to pretend I hadn't heard, but I had. I sat down without finishing the blessing. Isla didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to. Caleb was busy flicking peas at the centerpiece. The conversation moved on. Later that evening, as I helped Isla dry dishes in the kitchen, she said it casually, like she was offering helpful feedback. "Maybe next time you keep it brief. People just want to eat, not hear a speech. It was said with a smile, as if it were reasonable, as if I had somehow made things awkward by speaking at all. I nodded, said, "Of course," and that was it. But something lodged itself in my chest that night. Something tight and cold. I couldn't name it at the time, but I knew something had shifted. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she looked at me when she said them, like I was being a little too much. I tried to brush it off, told myself it wasn't a big deal, that she was stressed from hosting, that Brad had always had a sharp tongue, and maybe I had been rambling, but deep down I felt the sting. And once that feeling settled in, I started seeing everything differently. I noticed how Isla had stopped asking for my opinion on anything, how Brad always referred to me as your mom instead of Marlene. I noticed how Caleb would roll his eyes when I corrected his manners, like I was just some old lady getting in the way. Still, I told myself, it's nothing. Every family has moments. Every generation has their gaps. Don't be sensitive. But Thanksgiving had been my holiday. The one I always made feel special. The one I used to spend 2 weeks prepping for. And now, I was just a guest, and not even one they truly listened to. It wasn't outright cruelty. It was something subtler. The slow erosion of reverence, of affection, of place. That moment at the table, the way Brad joked, the way Isla laughed, the way no one defended me, was the first clear sign. I was no longer the heart of the family. I was becoming a footnote. And even though I pretended not to notice, a small voice inside me whispered, "This wasn't the last time you'll feel like this." After Thanksgiving, I began to notice the small ways I was disappearing. Not dramatically, not all at once, just piece by piece, like someone slowly dimming the lights in a room until you're sitting in the dark and don't remember when it started. At first, it was little things. Group texts that used to include me suddenly didn't. I found out about family plans through photos Isla posted on Facebook. Caleb's school play, Brad's company barbecue, a weekend getaway to the lake. I clicked through the photos alone, sitting on my couch with the TV on low for background noise. I stared at Caleb's smiling face in a group shot and wondered how I had become someone they didn't even think to invite. One Sunday, I called Isla just to check in. We used to talk every other day, just quick updates. What she made for dinner, funny things Caleb said, how tired she was from work. But that day she sounded distracted, like my voice was an interruption. "Is this important, Mom?" she asked. "I'm trying to get through some emails." I paused. "No, nothing urgent. Just saying hi." "Oh, okay, well, can we talk later?" Later didn't come. I sat at my kitchen table after we hung up and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank email draft I had opened for no reason. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I'd write her something. Maybe I thought I'd say what I was too proud to say out loud. "I miss you. I feel forgotten. I don't know where I went in your life." But I didn't send anything. I just made tea instead. A few weeks later, I stopped by their house with a basket of oranges and some books I thought Caleb would love. He'd been getting into outer space lately, and I'd found a vintage NASA guide at the thrift store. I thought he'd light up. Brad opened the door. "Oh," he said. "Didn't know you were coming." I laughed lightly. "Just passing by. Thought I'd drop off a few things." He let me in, but I could feel it. His energy was tight, like I was a house guest overstaying a visit I hadn't even been invited to. Caleb came running down the stairs but stopped when he saw me. "Oh, hi, Grandma." He sounded more surprised than happy. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Look what I found. Space books." He took them politely but didn't crack a smile. "Cool," he said before turning and walking away. Isla was upstairs napping. Brad told me she'd had a long night and needed rest. I didn't stay long. I walked back out with my empty basket and the sound of a child I loved more than life calling me extra under his breath. "Extra grandma," he had said once, laughing. It was a joke, but it stuck in my bones. I tried to shake it off. I convinced myself I was just being overly sensitive, that I needed to stop taking everything personally. But things didn't get better. they got colder. I stopped getting calls about Caleb's milestones. I used to be the first one Isla called when he lost a tooth, or said something clever, or needed a new pair of shoes. Now, weeks would go by and I'd hear nothing. I began to notice that when I did visit, Isla kept glancing at the clock. Brad would say things like, "We've got a lot to do today," or "We're trying to keep things low-key," as if I was a disruption to their perfectly curated lives. One day, I mentioned that I had been feeling a little down. Isla blinked at me and said, "Well, maybe you should get a hobby or something, Mom. I mean, you have a lot of free time now." I smiled. I nodded. But inside, I felt like she had just said I no longer had value. I started going to bed earlier, turning my phone on silent, pretending to be busy so I wouldn't have to admit to myself that no one was reaching out. The love I had poured so endlessly into our lives had begun to evaporate, and no one seemed to notice the drought. That was the worst part. Not the silence, not the exclusion, but the indifference. It wasn't that they were cruel, it was that they didn't even seem to see me anymore. And slowly, without meaning to, I started believing I wasn't worth seeing. It happened on Isla's 34th birthday. I remember because I had started preparing for it 2 weeks in advance. She told me not to go overboard this year, just something simple, but I couldn't help myself. When you've spent your life showing love through gestures, scaling back doesn't come easy, especially when it's your child. I made all her favorites: lemon rosemary chicken, garlic mashed potatoes. The chocolate pecan pie she once told me was better than anything she'd ever had in a restaurant. I even wrapped a little gift for Caleb, just a science kit I picked up at the craft store. I knew it wasn't his birthday, but I didn't want him to feel left out. I arrived early and asked Isla if I could help set the table. She hesitated. "It's already set, Mom. You can just relax." I offered to light the candles, pour drinks, put out the food. She waved me off each time, so I stayed in the kitchen, carefully arranging the dishes I brought like they were pieces of art. The guests began arriving, mostly Brad's friends and Isla's coworkers. I knew a few of them by face, but none by name. I smiled, greeted them warmly, and tried to blend in. I noticed Brad poured drinks like a bartender hosting a high-end cocktail hour. Isla laughed easily, her hand resting on his arm like they were the stars of a magazine spread. She was beautiful, no question, confident, polished. She moved through the room like she didn't remember the version of herself who used to cry on my lap over broken hearts and bad grades. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, holding a glass of sparkling water, when someone brought up childhood stories. A guest asked Isla what she was like as a kid. She smiled and said, "Oh, I was a handful. My mom used to narrate everything like she was in a movie. Every dinner turned into an Oscar speech." They laughed. I laughed too, lightly, hoping it would pass. But then she added, "Seriously, she still does it. You should see her at holidays. Every dish comes with a backstory and a quote." More laughter. Then Brad chimed in. "It's like dinner and a one-woman show, starring Marlene." I felt a strange heat in my cheeks. I wasn't sure if it was shame or sadness or both. Someone jokingly asked if I planned to give a birthday speech that night. And before I could respond, Isla said, "Let's hope not. Otherwise, we'll be here till dessert melts." The whole room laughed, loud this time. I smiled, nodded, took a sip of my drink so they wouldn't see my lip tremble. No one looked to me for a response. Not one person noticed how still I went. I excused myself quietly and walked into the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and stared at the beige tile floor. I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy. I just sat there, hearing their laughter echo through the thin walls, thinking about how small I had become in their eyes. A woman who once meant everything to her daughter, now reduced to a joke with punchlines and eye rolls. I stayed in there until my heart stopped pounding, washed my hands even though I hadn't used the sink, reapplied my lipstick, practiced a smile in the mirror. Then I walked back out, served the pie I had made, and said goodnight earlier than usual. No one asked why. Brad waved half-heartedly. Isla gave me a distracted hug, one arm still holding a champagne flute. Caleb was already playing on his tablet. I left the house holding the empty pie tray I'd brought with me and realized something painful. They hadn't just stopped listening, they had started laughing, not behind my back, to my face. And that moment in the middle of a crowded room, with the people I had sacrificed everything for, made something very clear. I wasn't just unappreciated anymore, I was unnecessary. I didn't say anything right away. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting, no slamming of doors. I just stopped. That night, after Isla's birthday dinner, I went home, washed the pie tray in warm water, and placed it carefully in the cupboard. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. It was like something had finally clicked into place, but not in the way I hoped, not in the comforting way of solving a puzzle or remembering a name. No, this was a colder kind of clarity, a realization that I had become a prop in their lives, the kind of character who appears in the background of family photos, whose presence is expected but never cherished. I thought about Isla's laugh, how freely it had come when they mocked me. Not a nervous laugh, not an unsure giggle, but a full, unbothered sound like she had no idea or no concern that she was cutting into someone who would have walked barefoot through fire for her. That was the worst part. Not the silence, not the exclusion, but the indifference. It wasn't that they were cruel, it was that they didn't even seem to see me anymore. And slowly, without meaning to, I started believing I wasn't worth seeing. It happened on Isla's 34th birthday. I remember because I had started preparing for it 2 weeks in advance. She told me not to go overboard this year, just something simple. But I couldn't help myself. When you've spent your life showing love through gestures, scaling back doesn't come easy, especially when it's your child. I made all her favorites: lemon rosemary chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, the chocolate pecan pie she once told me was better than anything she'd ever had in a restaurant. I even wrapped a little gift for Caleb, just a science kit I picked up at the craft store. I knew it wasn't his birthday, but I didn't want him to feel left out. I arrived early and asked Isla if I could help set the table. She hesitated. "It's already set, Mom. You can just relax." I offered to light the candles, pour drinks, put out the food. She waved me off each time. So I stayed in the kitchen, carefully arranging the dishes I brought like they were pieces of art. The guests began arriving, mostly Brad's friends and Isla's coworkers. I knew a few of them by face, but none by name. I smiled, greeted them warmly, and tried to blend in. I noticed Brad poured drinks like a bartender hosting a high-end cocktail hour. Isla laughed easily, her hand resting on his arm like they were the stars of a magazine spread. She was beautiful, no question, confident, polished. She moved through the room like she didn't remember the version of herself who used to cry on my lap over broken hearts and bad grades. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, holding a glass of sparkling water, when someone brought up childhood stories. A guest asked Isla what she was like as a kid. She smiled and said, "Oh, I was a handful. My mom used to narrate everything like she was in a movie. Every dinner turned into an Oscar speech." They laughed. I laughed too, lightly, hoping it would pass. But then she added, "Seriously, she still does it. You should see her at holidays. Every dish comes with a backstory and a quote." More laughter. Then Brad chimed in. "It's like dinner and a one-woman show, starring Marlene." I felt a strange heat in my cheeks. I wasn't sure if it was shame or sadness or both. Someone jokingly asked if I planned to give a birthday speech that night. And before I could respond, Isla said, "Let's hope not. Otherwise, we'll be here till dessert melts." The whole room laughed, loud this time. I smiled, nodded, took a sip of my drink so they wouldn't see my lip tremble. No one looked to me for a response. Not one person noticed how still I went. I excused myself quietly and walked into the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and stared at the beige tile floor. I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy. I just sat there, hearing their laughter echo through the thin walls, thinking about how small I had become in their eyes. A woman who once meant everything to her daughter, now reduced to a joke with punchlines and eye rolls. I stayed in there until my heart stopped pounding, washed my hands even though I hadn't used the sink, reapplied my lipstick, practiced a smile in the mirror. Then I walked back out, served the pie I had made, and said goodnight earlier than usual. No one asked why. Brad waved half-heartedly. Isla gave me a distracted hug, one arm still holding a champagne flute. Caleb was already playing on his tablet. I left the house holding the empty pie tray I'd brought with me and realized something painful. They hadn't just stopped listening. They had started laughing, not behind my back, to my face. And that moment in the middle of a crowded room, with the people I had sacrificed everything for, made something very clear. I wasn't just unappreciated anymore. I was unnecessary. I didn't say anything right away. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting, no slamming of doors. I just stopped. That night, after Isla's birthday dinner, I went home, washed the pie tray in warm water, and placed it carefully in the cupboard. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. It was like something had finally clicked into place, but not in the way I hoped. Not in the comforting way of solving a puzzle or remembering a name. No, this was a colder kind of clarity, a realization that I had become a prop in their lives, the kind of character who appears in the background of family photos, whose presence is expected but never cherished. I thought about Isla's laugh, how freely it had come when they mocked me. Not a nervous laugh, not an unsure giggle, but a full, unbothered sound like she had no idea or no concern that she was cutting into someone who would have walked barefoot through fire for her. I thought about Caleb and his screen, how he barely looked up anymore, how I was becoming someone he tolerated rather than treasured. And I thought about the moment in the bathroom when I sat on the cold tile floor and felt absolutely empty. So I did what no one expected me to do. I stopped showing up. I didn't call the next day or the day after. I didn't send my usual "have a good week" text on Monday morning. I didn't drop off groceries or offer to watch Caleb while they ran errands. I didn't ask if they needed anything I didn't bake. I simply disappeared from their lives. At first, I thought I'd get a call. Maybe Isla would notice. Maybe she'd ask if something was wrong. But silence was met with silence. A week passed, then two, and still nothing. No one checked in. No one asked why Sunday dinner hadn't been scheduled. No one wondered why I hadn't sent a reminder for Caleb's science fair, even though I was always the one who helped him build those messy, wonderful little volcanoes. I deleted the family group chat from my phone, not out of spite, but because it had become just another place where my messages went unanswered. I stopped liking their posts. I stopped watching their stories. I stopped waiting for them to care. I began to reclaim my time in quiet ways. I bought a puzzle, the big kind with tiny, complicated pieces. I found a dusty old watercolor kit in the back of my closet. I started walking each morning, not far, just down the block and back, breathing in the air like it owed me something. I even checked out a few books from the library. But mostly, I just sat with myself. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the constant pull to give, to serve, to earn my place in someone else's life. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just tired. Tired of being the first one to reach out. Tired of being invited only when they needed something. Tired of showing up with full hands and going home empty. Isla had once told me, "You always make everything about you." And maybe she was right. Maybe I did. Because I had spent my whole life centering them, loving them, supporting them, lifting them up. And in doing so, I forgot that I was a person too. A person who deserved to be seen, not just used. Heard, not just tolerated. Walking away wasn't a decision. It was a quiet unraveling of a thread I'd held onto too tightly for too long. And once I let go, I realized how much of my identity had been built on being needed. Now I was learning who I was without that. And though the silence hurt, it also felt like air returning to lungs that hadn't breathed in years. They assumed I'd be back, that I always come back. But I wasn't a doormat. I was a woman who had given enough, and I was finally learning how to sit in my own stillness and feel whole. Christmas came, and the silence was deafening. It was the first holiday in over 3 decades that I didn't spend surrounded by family. No wrapping paper littering the living room floor, no giggling child climbing into my lap to show off a new toy, no smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven, just quiet. Cold, unforgiving quiet. I had decorated out of habit more than hope. A small artificial tree stood in the corner of my living room. It used to overflow with handmade ornaments. Caleb's clay snowman, Isla's glitter-covered popsicle stick star. But this year, I left most of them in the box. I couldn't bear to touch them. I strung a single strand of white lights and hung 3 gold baubles. That was it. On Christmas Eve, I made myself a bowl of soup, not because I was hungry, but because it gave my hands something to do. I ate it slowly, staring out the window at the snow falling in heavy, silent sheets, the kind of snow that muffles the whole world, even your thoughts. I tried not to check my phone, but I did. Twice. No texts, no missed calls, no Merry Christmas, Mom. Not even a message from Caleb. They hadn't forgotten. No, forgetting would have hurt less. They had simply moved on. I sat on the couch wrapped in an old knit blanket, one Isla made in high school. It was fraying at the edges, but I couldn't throw it away. I held it close, remembering her teenage laughter, the way she used to fall asleep with her head in my lap during holiday movies. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the mug of tea, not from the cold, but from the ache of being entirely, utterly unnecessary. I was alone. Not just physically, but in the kind of way that makes you feel like you're slowly dissolving. Like if you didn't speak aloud, no one would remember you ever had a voice. It snowed through the night. And in the morning, I walked outside in my slippers to find the world blanketed in white. Not a single footprint on my sidewalk, not a soul in sight. I stood there, hugging myself as the wind picked up, brushing snow into my hair like confetti at a party I wasn't invited to. I looked at the mailbox, empty. Even the usual cards from distant relatives or neighbors didn't come this year. Maybe they were late, maybe they forgot. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, they sensed what everyone else had, that I had faded, that I was no longer relevant, that my story had ended and I just hadn't gotten the memo. I went back inside, sat in my armchair, and let the day pass without marking it. I didn't open the pie I bought from the bakery, didn't light the candle I usually place near the window for Gary, even though we hadn't spoken in 20 years. There was no one to share it with. Rock bottom, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or sobs. It creeps in slowly, disguised as ordinary days when no one calls, when the food doesn't taste like anything, when the silence no longer feels peaceful. It feels personal. It feels like punishment. I didn't cry that day. But that night, lying in bed with the Christmas lights still glowing faintly in the corner, I whispered to the ceiling, "Is this it? Is this what the rest of it's going to feel like?" Not in anger, not even in despair, just in stunned resignation. And the only answer I got was the low hum of the heater and the soft ticking of the clock on the nightstand. That was my rock bottom. Not a single moment, but a long, painful stillness, where the only thing louder than the silence was the question echoing in my chest, what am I now, if I'm no longer needed by the people I gave everything to? It was mid-January when I decided to drop off a box of old photo albums at Isla's house. I didn't call ahead. I hadn't spoken to her since before Christmas, and I wasn't ready to talk. But I couldn't stand looking at the albums anymore. Dozens of plastic sleeves filled with memories that once felt warm and permanent. now tinged with something colder. I thought maybe she'd want them. Maybe she'd find use for the pictures I no longer had the heart to look at. When I pulled into their driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had. Pristine, beige stone with dark shutters, a red wreath still hanging on the front door, even though the holidays were long over. I rang the bell, but no one answered. Their car wasn't in the driveway. A note on the door said, "Back in 30." I hesitated, then let myself in using the spare key they'd given me years ago. I felt uneasy doing it, but I wasn't planning to stay. Just drop the box inside the foyer and leave. The house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry. Music played faintly from a speaker in the living room. Something soft, jazzy, the kind of music you put on when you're not really listening, just filling the silence. I set the box gently by the coat rack and was about to leave when I noticed a stack of papers clipped to the refrigerator with a pineapple-shaped magnet. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer and read the top page. It was a catering invoice. Brad's birthday party, guest count 24, private chef estimate, $1,100. My stomach turned. His birthday had been 3 weeks ago. I hadn't been invited. I scanned the page again, hoping I had misunderstood. Maybe it was an event at work, a corporate thing? But no, there was a handwritten note at the bottom in Isla's handwriting. Don't forget to confirm playlist with DJ. Ask Caleb to make a birthday video montage. A party, with a DJ, a montage, 24 guests, and not a single mention of me, not even in the grandparents section. I stood there staring at the paper for longer than I should have. I could feel something rising in my chest, something hot and bitter, like the beginning of a scream I knew I'd never let out. It wasn't the party. It was the clarity. It was the final, irrefutable proof that I was no longer considered part of the family fabric. Not even as decoration. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded, intentionally. They had hosted a full celebration for Brad, with music, food, custom touches, and no one thought, should we invite Mom? Not Isla, not Brad, not even Caleb, who I'd once carried through sleepless nights with a song I made up just for him. I stepped back from the fridge and looked around the kitchen. The marble counters, the glowing pendant lights, the spotless sink. There was no trace of me in this house anymore. None. No pie tins, no casseroles cooling on trivets, no knitted pot holders I'd made years ago. Even the small photo of Isla and me at her graduation was gone from the sideboard. I wandered into the hallway and peeked into the living room. Everything was polished, curated, pretty, and I didn't belong there anymore. I was a relic. Out of place in their world of brunch reservations and matching family pajamas, but I wasn't angry. I was awake. Awake to the truth that had been whispering for months but that I had refused to hear. I had been removed from their story, and they didn't even think I'd notice. I left the box of albums by the front door and closed the door gently behind me. As I walked down the steps, the cold air hit my face and stung my eyes. But I didn't cry. Not this time. This wasn't heartbreak. It was illumination. And it was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Resolve. That night, after leaving Isla's house, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove. Nowhere in particular. Just through quiet neighborhoods and empty streets lined with leafless trees and the occasional flicker of porch lights. I let the wheels turn while my thoughts tumbled and unraveled inside me. For once, I wasn't running from the pain. I was sitting in it, letting it speak. And what it said was simple. You are not anyone's leftover. I parked near the lake. It was still and cold, reflecting the faint silver of the moon. I rolled down my window and listened to the quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but sacred, like the kind you earn after years of noise. And then I remembered something. Years ago, before Isla was born, before the diapers and double shifts and sacrifices, I used to paint. Not professionally, not even well, but I loved it. I had an easel, a cheap set of oils, and a little corner by the window where I'd sit for hours, mixing colors until the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the floor. I hadn't thought about that version of myself in decades. Somewhere along the way, I'd buried her beneath casseroles, grocery runs, school projects, job applications, doctor's appointments, and birthday parties. I'd folded her up and tucked her into the bottom drawer of motherhood, but sitting there by the lake, with the sting of that catering invoice still fresh in my chest, she came back to me. Not in a dramatic flash, not in a rush of inspiration, but in a whisper. "You're still here." The next morning, I woke up early. The air in the house felt different, lighter somehow, like it was waiting for something. I opened the hallway closet and reached into the back, behind the winter coats and old storage bins, and pulled out a dust-covered box, my easel. I wiped it off piece by piece. The wood was a little warped, but it stood strong, just like me. I set it up in front of the living room window. Then I drove to the art supply store. The cashier smiled when I told her it had been 30 years since I last bought brushes. She said, "Well, welcome back." I nearly cried right there at the register. That afternoon, I painted for the first time in over 3 decades. It wasn't good, but it was mine. For 2 hours, I didn't think about Isla, or Brad, or Caleb. I didn't think about the way I had been erased or excluded or dismissed. I thought about light and shadow. I thought about color and contrast. I thought about the way blue mixed with white made something softer than sky. And when I stepped back and looked at the half-finished canvas, I didn't see failure. I saw beginnings. That same week, I signed up for a watercolor class at the local community center. I hesitated before clicking register, afraid I'd stand out or feel silly. But when I showed up, I wasn't the only woman with silver in her hair and something to reclaim. I met Dolores, a retired librarian who wore red glasses and made me laugh within 5 minutes. I met Teresa, who brought her dog-eared sketchbook to class like it was a sacred text. These women didn't know my history. They didn't know about the birthday dinner or the refrigerator invoice or the silence that had swallowed my holidays. They just knew me as Marlene, and that felt enough. Something in me shifted, not in a way anyone could see. Not yet, but I could feel it. I walked a little taller. I made real meals just for myself. I lit candles in the evening because I liked the scent, not because guests were coming. I pulled out my old sewing machine and fixed a rip in my coat instead of tossing it aside. I stopped waiting for Isla to call, and when I looked at my phone and saw no messages, I didn't take it as proof of my worthlessness. I took it as space, room to breathe, room to come home to myself, because somewhere between motherhood and invisibility, I had forgotten that I was more than what I gave to others. And now, for the first time in years, I was remembering. By February, the silence between Isla and me had settled into something permanent. There were no more half-expected phone calls, no surprise knock on the door from Caleb, no messages checking if I was free for dinner, and I no longer waited for them. Instead, I turned my energy inward, quietly, intentionally, and without apology. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a reconstruction. I started with small things. I changed the lock on my front door, not because I feared them, but because it was time to make the house mine again. For years, Isla and Brad had a spare key. They would let themselves in when I was out to grab baking trays, borrow folding chairs, or dig through my pantry. I hadn't minded, until one day I realized I had made my home theirs without ever asking if I still belonged in theirs. So I changed the locks. And then I cleaned out the guest room, Caleb's room. It still held his favorite blanket, some of his picture books, a box of Legos we used to build castles with. I packed everything gently into a storage bin and slid it into the closet. I donated the extra dresser, repainted the walls a soft lavender. Then I turned the room into an art space. My easel stood in the middle, basking in natural light from the wide window. A shelf held my paints and brushes. A corkboard displayed unfinished pieces and little quotes that made me feel strong. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't scream for attention, but it was deliberate. Every drawer I cleaned, every object I donated, every inch of space I reclaimed, it all whispered the same thing. You're building a life that doesn't revolve around being needed by people who don't see you. I reworked my finances too. I made an appointment with a financial advisor at the local credit union. A young woman named Casey walked me through my options. I told her I wanted to ensure my will was in order. She asked who my beneficiaries were. For the first time, I paused. It had always been Isla, Caleb, but now I wasn't sure. I left the space blank, told her I needed to think. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out every document I had put off reviewing. My will, my insurance, my savings accounts, my house title. I read everything. Highlighted what I didn't understand. Made a list of questions. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was just making sure that the woman who had held everyone else's life together would finally take care of her own. I started saying no. When the church committee asked me to bake for the fundraiser, I declined. Not because I was bitter, but because I had been giving myself away for years in 1,000 unpaid ways, and I was learning to count the cost. When a neighbor asked if I could watch her kids for the afternoon, I said, "I'm sorry, I have other plans." And I did. My plans were a cup of tea, a blank canvas, and an hour of silence. I joined a book club. Dolores invited me. I went, not as someone's mother or someone's grandmother, but simply as Marlene. They asked for my opinion and actually listened. I forgot how powerful that felt. At home, I stopped cooking for 4. I made meals for 1 and plated them like I mattered. And slowly, I began deleting the apps on my phone that kept me tethered to people who had already let go of me emotionally. Facebook gone, Instagram gone. I didn't need to watch Isla's life through a screen. I didn't need the pain of seeing what they were happy to do without me. I replaced the noise with music I loved. Nina Simone, Joan Baez, Patsy Cline, music that made me feel like myself again. I didn't announce any of this. I didn't post about it, write letters, or stage a confrontation. I simply began. And in that beginning, I discovered something extraordinary. You don't have to make noise to reclaim your power. Sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is retreat from what wounds her and rebuild in peace. It started with a voicemail. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Caleb's got his spring recital next week. No pressure, but let us know if you're coming." I listened to it twice. Once to hear her words. The second time to hear her tone. She sounded unsure, tentative, like someone knocking on a door they once barged through. I didn't call back, not out of spite, not to be cruel. I just didn't feel the urgency anymore. I was no longer operating from that familiar, panicked place of needing to be included, needing to stay relevant. Their silence had once shattered me. Now mine was beginning to speak louder. A few days later, another message. "Hey, Mom, I hope everything's okay. Brad said he saw your car at the art supply store. Didn't know you were painting again. That's great. Just hope you're all right." I was more than all right. I had just finished my 3rd painting, a silhouette of a woman sitting on a bench beneath a cherry blossom tree. Branches in bloom, petals drifting all around her. She looked peaceful, grounded, alone, but not lonely. The piece didn't need approval. It didn't need applause. It just existed. Like me. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Just 4 women from my art class and Dolores from book club. We drank sparkling cider and laughed until our ribs hurt. I made chicken salad sandwiches and lemon bars. Someone brought a vintage jazz vinyl and we played it while we passed around each other's sketchbooks. I hadn't laughed like that in years. The next morning, I got a text from Isla. "Saw the pictures Dolores posted. Your house looks lovely. Wish we'd been invited." For the first time in my life, I stared at a message from my daughter and didn't feel guilt, not sadness, not yearning, just clarity. She was noticing the shift now. The woman they had gently erased from their narrative was beginning to write her own chapter. I never raised my voice. I never argued. I never called her selfish or ungrateful. I had simply removed myself from the roles they assigned me, and they were beginning to feel the weight of my absence. Brad called too, left a message saying they wanted to make things right, said they were surprised. I hadn't reached out for Caleb's birthday this year, but I wasn't surprised. I was finally done performing the emotional labor of keeping a seat at the table they no longer offered me. Even Caleb, sweet boy that he once was, had begun to feel the gap. I received a handwritten card in the mail. Crayons. Blocky letters. Spelled imperfectly. "Grandma, I miss you. I told Mom. She said you're busy now. Are you mad? I hope you're not. You're the best at cookies." I held the card for a long time. I missed him, yes, but not enough to abandon the version of myself I had only just begun to rediscover. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. When a woman stops being available for everyone else's comfort, it unsettles people. They don't know what to do when the one who always showed up doesn't. That's when the power begins to shift. I didn't threaten. I didn't demand anything. But they started to feel something I had felt for far too long: uncertainty. That shaky, questioning feeling of not knowing where you stand with someone you always took for granted. I watched it play out in small ways. A text from Isla at midnight that simply said, "Are you okay?" A missed call from Brad with no follow-up. A bouquet of flowers left on my porch without a note. And still, I said nothing. Because silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is control. It is grace, with a backbone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to win them back. I was simply watching them realize what they lost, and I didn't need them to say it out loud. I could see it written in every delayed message, every strained voicemail, every awkward attempt to pretend like they hadn't pushed me out. The tables were turning, and I didn't lift a finger. It was a Sunday afternoon when Isla showed up at my door. No text, no call, just her standing there on the porch, arms folded tight across her chest, like a child caught between shame and stubbornness. I saw her through the curtain before I opened the door. For a brief moment, I considered not answering. I had spent so long waiting for that doorbell to ring. I used to imagine it, the apology, the tears, the dramatic reconciliation. But now that she was here, unannounced and clearly uneasy, I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness. I opened the door calmly. "Hi," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "Hi, Isla," I replied. My tone wasn't cold, just clear. She shifted awkwardly. "I didn't know if I should come." "You already did," I said gently. She looked around. "Can I come in?" I paused, just long enough for her to feel it, then stepped aside. The house smelled like lavender and lemon. A record was playing softly in the background. Etta James, "Sunday Kind of Love." My living room was tidy, warm, with my latest painting drying on the easel near the window. A cup of tea sat beside it. She noticed everything. "Wow," she said, glancing around. "You've really changed things." "I needed space for things that mattered," I said simply. She nodded, chewing on her lower lip. "I feel like we haven't talked in forever." "We haven't," I replied. She sat down on the edge of the couch like a guest in a stranger's home. She started, and then trailed off. I didn't rush her. I didn't fill the silence. I had learned by now that silence was not something to fear. It was a kind of truth. "I know we've been distant," she said finally, "and I'm sorry for that." I waited. She glanced at the painting. "You're really good, you know." I nodded. "Thank you." She swallowed hard. "I didn't realize how much you did for us. I mean, I knew, but I didn't see it. Not until you stopped." I looked her in the eyes for the first time. "That's the thing, Isla. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped shrinking to be loved." She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. "I spent years making your life easier. I gave up pieces of myself over and over, believing it was love. And when I needed a place in your life, I was treated like a performance that had overstayed its welcome. That's not what I meant, she tried to cut in. But it's what you said, I replied, calm but unwavering. And it's what you showed me, again and again. She looked down at her hands. I continued, I'm not here to make you feel guilty. That's never been my way. But I need you to understand something, Isla. This version of me, the one who paints, who reads, who enjoys silence and Sunday mornings, she's not going to beg to be included anymore. There was a long, still pause. Then she asked, So what happens now? And I told her the truth. What happens now depends on you. If you want to rebuild something with me, it will have to be real, equal, respectful. I won't be your background character. I won't be your default babysitter or your emotional sponge. I'll be your mother, with boundaries. She wiped at her eyes. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then start small, I said. Start by listening. And in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Not because I raised my voice or demanded anything, but because I had become a woman who knew her worth and finally spoke from it. There was no dramatic outburst, no tears flooding the floor. Just truth. Simple. Solid. Unapologetic. And that was enough. A week after Isla's visit, I received a letter in the mail. Not a bill. Not a card. A formal envelope addressed in Brad's handwriting. Neat, stiff, controlled. Inside was a typed message. Marlene, we've been thinking a lot about our recent conversation. We understand if you're not ready, but Caleb's birthday is coming up and he's asked about you several times. If you feel comfortable, we'd love to have you join us. Also, we thought you should know, we've made some updates to our legal documents. We realized we had never formally asked, but we had listed you as Caleb's emergency guardian in our will. We've removed your name, of course, since you've chosen to step back from family involvement. No hard feelings, just clarity. Brad and Isla. I read it twice, then a third time. It was meant to hurt. That much was clear. It was wrapped in civility, but every line bled with control, an attempt to reassert power under the guise of respecting my space, a message that translated to, if you won't be who we want you to be, then we'll erase your role entirely. They assumed this would shake me, that I'd come running, begging, pleading to be part of their family again. What they didn't know, what they hadn't even thought to consider, was that 2 weeks earlier, I had quietly made a change of my own. After reviewing my financial portfolio and updating my own legal documents, I had chosen to allocate a significant portion of my estate. Not to Isla, not to Brad, not even to Caleb. I had set up a scholarship fund, a full tuition 4-year grant for children of single mothers pursuing art, writing, or music. Creative kids who had talent but no support. Kids like Isla once was, only now I was pouring into others. Not because they were mine by blood, but because they saw me, because they needed me, because they valued what I had to give. I named it the Marlene Grace Fund. It felt right. And I had made one other decision, one they didn't see coming. I transferred the deed to my house, free and clear, to the organization as a future community art retreat. Upon my passing, my home would become a space where creativity and healing could flourish for people who had known loss, abandonment, or invisibility. The same things I had survived. So when Brad's letter arrived, informing me that they had removed me from their lives legally, I smiled. Because I had already removed myself emotionally, and with far more grace. 2 days later, I sent them a short reply, handwritten, no bitterness, just truth. Dear Isla and Brad, thank you for your letter. I wish Caleb a joyful birthday. I respect your decision to update your documents. In return, I've made some changes of my own. While I've stepped back from the role you once expected me to fill, I've stepped fully into one that allows me peace, purpose, and pride. I've chosen to redirect my legacy to those who see me, not as a fixture, but as a force. With that said, I hold no resentment. I simply choose not to water gardens where my roots were pulled up. All the best, Marlene. I sealed it, stamped it, and walked it down to the mailbox myself. The next day, I painted a new piece. It was of a tree growing from a cracked vase, roots wrapped in broken ceramic, blossoms blooming anyway. It was titled, "Still Here." Let them rewrite their documents. Let them strike my name from legal lines and holiday invitations. Because I had finally written my own terms. And in doing so, I found justice. Not in vengeance, not in making them suffer, but in reclaiming everything I once gave away for free and making it beautiful. It was early spring when I heard the knock. Not a quick, casual tap, the kind Brad used to do with his keys still jangling in his hand. This was gentler, almost hesitant. I opened the door and found Caleb standing there, alone, holding something behind his back. He looked taller than I remembered. His cheeks less round, his eyes more searching. He rocked slightly on his heels the way he used to when he was nervous as a little boy. "Hi, Grandma," he said, soft but clear. I blinked. "Hi, Caleb." We stood there for a long moment, not speaking. The wind rustled through the early tulips in my front yard. Birds chirped in the trees. I could hear the world moving around us, but inside that moment, everything stood still. Then he pulled out what he'd been hiding, a painting. Childish, yes, but earnest. It was a simple watercolor of two people sitting on a bench, holding hands. One was tall, with big gray curls. The other was small, holding a cookie. "I made it for you," he said. "We had to do art projects about people we love." My throat tightened. "It's beautiful." He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, but I could see his fingers fidgeting at the edges. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I'll always want to see you," I said quietly. He looked up, his eyes bright. "Mom said you were busy with your art classes and your new friends. She said maybe you didn't have time for us anymore." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, glancing around like he was seeing the place for the first time. The painting I'd been working on sat on the easel. My books were stacked neatly by the armchair. The house was lived in, warm, but different. It didn't feel like the backdrop to someone else's life anymore. It felt like mine. He wandered over to the easel and looked at the piece. Another tree, blooming against a cloudy sky. "You're really good," he said. "Thank you. Can I come over sometimes again? Just to hang out?" I paused. Not because I didn't want him there. I did. But I had spent so long being available for everyone else's timeline, everyone else's expectations. Now I needed to answer from my center, not my guilt. "You can," I said, "but only if you come because you want to, not because someone told you to." He nodded slowly. "I want to." I smiled. "Then I'd love that." Later that week, Isla called. Not to apologize, not to talk things out, just to say thank you. "I heard you let Caleb come by," she said. "He was happy. Said your house felt different." "It is different," I replied. There was a pause. "I didn't mean for us to drift so far apart," she offered. "I know," I said, "but we did. I'd like to try again, if you're open to it." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. "I'm not the same woman you remember," I told her, "and I won't fit back into the version of me that made everyone comfortable but left me hollow." She was quiet for a long time. "I think I'm just starting to understand that," she said. "Then we can start from there." We didn't make plans. We didn't map out some perfect return. We just sat in the truth. Later, I baked cookies, not because they asked, but because I wanted to. And when Caleb came by again, he helped me paint clouds on a new canvas. He picked the colors. I held the brush steady. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. There was no performance anymore. No proving, no pleasing, just presence. And in that quiet, slow rebuilding, not of a family but of myself, I found something more powerful than forgiveness. I found peace. It was a Thursday morning when I stepped out onto the porch with my tea and realized something had changed. Not the weather. It was still cool. The air still smelled like spring soil and fresh-cut grass. The world was the same. But I wasn't. I sat in my usual spot, the chair with the green cushion, and stared at the yard. The tulips I'd planted in early March were blooming now, not all at once. Some were still curled tightly, unsure if it was their time, but enough had opened to know they'd survived the winter. I wrapped my sweater tighter around my shoulders and breathed in the moment. It had been nearly 4 months since I'd walked away from the version of my life where my worth was measured by how much I did for others. 4 months since I stopped showing up to be overlooked, to be spoken over, to be used up. And now I didn't crave their approval, not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared enough about me. There was a time when silence terrified me, when empty rooms and untouched phones felt like proof that I was failing as a mother, as a woman, as a person. Now I welcome the quiet. It gave me space to hear myself again, to remember that I am not just someone's mother or grandmother or support system. I am a whole person, with history, with heart, with a voice. A small part of me had feared that walking away would mean isolation, that letting go of the role I'd played for so long would leave me hollow. But that fear had been planted in me by years of serving others while starving myself. What I found instead was this. When you stop begging for love in places that treat it like a transaction, you begin to uncover the kind of love that doesn't demand exhaustion. I rediscovered joy in things that were mine. The soft swish of a paintbrush against canvas, the smell of cinnamon toast on a slow Sunday, the sound of laughter around a table where everyone had chosen to be present. I no longer measured my days by how many people needed me. I measured them by how fully I showed up for myself. One evening, I stood in front of my newest painting. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a window with sunlight streaming in. And Caleb came over, peered at it, and said, "It feels like morning." And it did. Because that's what this new chapter felt like. A quiet, steady morning after a long, bitter night. Isla and I were speaking again. Not every day, not without tension, but with something new between us. Boundaries. Not the cold kind, the sacred kind. I didn't rush to fix things anymore. I didn't explain myself. And in doing less, I felt more whole. I had even told her, gently but firmly, that I had updated my will, that my home and savings would go to a cause that reflected my values, not just my family tree. She had blinked in surprise but said nothing. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was simply living in truth. The truth that love should never cost you your sense of self. That being someone's mother doesn't mean disappearing into the background of their story. That it's okay, more than okay, to step forward into the light of your own life. As the sun warmed my knees and the wind shifted through the garden, I looked out over my little world, quiet, simple, and entirely mine, and I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally whole. And that was the ending I never saw coming. Not revenge, not regret,